We go to the phones. Joining us this morning, always a pleasure to visit with our next guest. We've got Congressman Jodey Arrington joining us. Congressman, good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm always better, as you know, when I'm in God's country. I think the fact that I'm still here in the swamp probably has got you guys even screwed up back there at the station.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. We're going to blame you. It's all the congressman's fault. It wasn't Jodey's fault. It's this Jodey's fault. Congressman.
No, it's good to be with you, Chad.
Absolutely. Good to be with you. I guess we'll start off with the jobs numbers that came out today. It seems like the president's happy about them. What do you think the jobs number says about how we're doing in the United States right now?
Well, in spite of the mainstream media trying to characterize states like Texas as cavalier and reckless, we believe that for the sake of freedom and for the sake of the livelihoods of our citizens, we ought to lean into reopening, and we can do it responsibly. And if we just give information to our citizens, then they'll act responsibly. The results are that our jobs are coming back. Unemployment, which was predicted a week or so ago to be 20%, it's now down to 11%. Some prognosticators had us losing 20 to 30% of our total economy by the end of the year. It's going to be 5%. So there's just, in an election, presidential election year with so much at stake, you just got to be real careful listening to some of these mainstream pundits. It's a good sign, Chad, and when we rid ourselves of bad policies that disincentivize people going to work, like paying people more to be on unemployment than their previous job, when we do things like that, I think we're going to see even a greater surge. Still have to be careful and responsible, but I think our governor's doing that. I think the states, mostly red states that are leaning into this, are right to do so long term. If you don't, there are going to be far greater consequences.
And we're supposed to see that extra $600 in unemployment. That's supposed to run out this month, right?
That's correct, July 31st.
Okay, and from everything that I've seen, I think it looks like the Democrats would love to re-up up that, but it looks like the White House and Republicans are against doing that, re-upping that extra amount of money into unemployment. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Look, we're providing liquidity and various temporary targeted federal assistance. I think it's appropriate. It was government that shut the economy down. We need to compensate folks for putting at risk their livelihoods. But the big barriers now are legal liability, which is having a litany of lawsuits from plaintiffs' attorneys when people are in good faith trying to open up safely, et cetera. And this applies to employees, business owners, customers, and then this unemployment disincentive. So we definitely have to get rid of that. And I think on top of the reopening, if we can provide incentives for people to stay on the payroll, I think you're going to see, again, even greater surges on our economic recovery.
The president has pretty much endorsed another round of stimulus checks going out to the American people. Said that they need to redo it to where there's not as many mistakes. I think there were over a million deceased folks who received checks last go around. Is that something that we're likely to see later in July after this, July recesses? And how do you feel about another round of stimulus going out?
Well, I think that we've got billions still moving through the system. Most of that, though, is to keep the lights on for the job creators and making sure people stay connected to their employers. That is the sweet spot. And by the way, 75% of the folks in our area are being paid more on unemployment than on at their previous job. Wow. And so anyway, I think that the stimulus checks, I was never a big fan of them at the beginning. I'm still not a fan of them. I think we need to make sure there's a safety net for folks who aren't able to keep their employment. And I think we just need to get the economy back on. And like I said, there are some targeted areas we need to provide assistance. There are ways that we can rev up the economy by lowering tax and regulatory burdens. But I think just sending out cash, I've just never been a big fan of that. Again, where they need a safety net, it should be there. It should be reliable. And if we need to shore that up, I'm all in for doing that.
What about a payroll tax cut?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I mean, once again, that would provide relief both for workers, and it would provide relief for small businesses especially. So that's a great idea. Again, tax breaks, we've got several in the works, and then some that are not even temporary and targeted. For example, I'm carrying legislation to make the full expensing permanent. That would be the most pro-growth thing we can do to accelerate the recovery, encourage investment, and get back to that pre-COVID historic and record numbers of low unemployment, wages up, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's something. Those are things that I'm absolutely interested in and working on as we speak.
Are you able to go with us one more segment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Before we take the break, I want to get into USMCA and everything else going on in the nation after we come back from the break. But before we do that, I do want to ask you. You're not the governor of Texas, but you know what's going on here. We've seen bars that have been reclosed. We've had at least one, maybe two bars just this week in Lubbock that have gone out of business, closing permanently. There are a lot of other bar owners who are just kind of barely hanging on at this point. What do you say to those individuals who have businesses, whether it be a restaurant or a bar, that have again been shut down or reduced their occupancy here in Texas and here in the 19th Congressional District?
I am very sympathetic to any owner of an enterprise where they're going to lose their livelihood because the government said you have to shut down. That's a taking. I think they should be compensated for it. Are there extreme situations where that is necessary and appropriate? Yes, but they should be compensated. Are we at a place where we need to tell folks to just shut it completely down and jeopardize their ability to feed their family? I don't know that. I don't know that. I know that we need to, maybe step up our game on precautions like wearing masks and other things. So you can tighten up restrictions and tighten up the precautionary strategies without telling people you can no longer make a living, pay your bills, feed your family. That should be the highest threshold, and it should be because there's a pervasive public impact and an inundation of the healthcare system. The question is that happening? Maybe in Houston? I don't even think it's happening in Houston. Is it happening in Lubbock? I don't believe it's happening in Lubbock. So there's a lot to talk about in that regard. It needs to be a high threshold. And if that decision's made, and again, the governor has more facts than I do, then they need to be compensated. That needs to coincide with that decision, because whether it's Greg Abbott or Jodey Arrington or local officials, they're getting paid whether this economy is open or not. And that's a dangerous, perverse incentive where we don't have to feel the pain with respect to the decisions we make on our economy. So,
where would that funding come from to pay? Because you're talking about paying a lot of money to a lot of bar owners in the state of Texas. Would that be a federal program or a state program? Where would those funds come from, in your opinion?
It has to be a shared responsibility, and there has to be shared risk. If it's all the feds, then you'll have blue states locking everybody down and expecting us to bail them out.
Right.
But it can't be all state and local because they don't have the borrowing authority that the feds have. So I've always said shared risk, shared responsibility, shared cost. And if we do it that way, I think the incentives are much more align for the right decision.
Has that been discussed? Not just for Texas, but I mean, you've got Florida that's doing the same thing. Has that been discussed in D.C. about, hey, if we're re-shutting down your business, we're going to help you out?
Yeah, it has, and I think we've done some of that. You can argue through PPP and other programs, but I think now that the real trade with the Democrats for the legal liability mitigation issue I talked about, for taking away that plus up on unemployment that's keeping people out of work and on the unemployment rolls, that trade is going to be on funding for states and cities. Again, if you don't have it structured well, then you're going to create moral hazard and have more irresponsible behavior from states, particularly blue states, and local governments. So that discussion is going on with respect to when we put out another tranche of targeted and temporary funding, it should be that shared risk, shared responsibility philosophy.
All right, we're going to take our break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the USMCA trade deal and much more with Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Congressman, we had a listener out there who said PPP helps, but it's generally designed to cover payroll. There are tons of other expenses that are causing businesses to have to fold. I guess, the question as we move forward and if this continues to be an issue, what more can be done to help out with other expenses? Does more need to be done?
I think there are pockets where some industries have benefited more than others, and I think we need to identify the ones that were not able to avail themselves of some of the temporary targeted assistance, whether it was PPP or the Main Street Lending Program. I think the tax incentives and tax breaks, like the payroll tax, helps everyone immediately, and there are plenty of other things like that. But, for example, restaurants have had a hard time opening up. They've been delayed in that. Energy operators and our producers haven't been able to make enough money to even, meet payroll, even if we didn't have COVID because of the supply crisis. So we just have to target those, and we have to continue to tweak the terms so that we provide them. It's the right thing to do to provide assistance right now as we turn it on. Yeah. But it can't be there forever, and it has to phase out over time. The Democrats want to bail out employer pension programs, cities and states that have been irresponsible. So we can't allow for that, but we got to help the folks that are doing everything they can and outside of their own control are being pummeled by the pandemic and the government's response.
USMCA trade deal went into effect yesterday. Talk about how that's going to benefit this area.
Well, first, we have now entered a new era of U.S. trade policy. It's America first. We have a president that is a businessman, and he understands that you negotiate from strength. He understands that you have rules that are fair and apply to everybody. You don't do deals that put you and your team at a disadvantage. This has leveled the playing field with Mexico. It's provided incentives to make things in America and in North America instead of importing cheap stuff from China. We know how that turns out. And it's opened up new markets and access to new customers in Canada, hundreds of millions of dollars just for U.S. dairy industry, not to mention many other industries that will benefit. And if you add China, Japan to this president in 3 years has negotiated over 50% of our international markets. And I guarantee you, not just for prosperity, not just for strengthening and expanding opportunities here at home economically, this is going to be a boon as we recover. This is going to be a tailwind to push us back to that pre-COVID. If we didn't have these things, including the China purchase agreement, it would be much harder and it'd be a longer slug to get back to where we were again prior to the pandemic.
Talk about this. I guess you could call it cultural war that's going on out there. We news that just broke when you came on, the alleged ringleader in that bid to destroy the Andrew Jackson statue outside the White House has been arrested. We've seen where the angry mobs have basically either torn down statues or had those statues removed. What are your thoughts on just what we're seeing as far as statues and really the history of the United States? How do you think? What do you think about all of this?
Well, first of all, I think we need law and order, and I think this is obviously coming from the left, and there are a bunch of anarchists who have nothing to do with the George Floyd situation, taking advantage of the opportunity. They're hijacking the constitutional right of Americans to peacefully protest and using that as a cover to commit crimes. We should have zero tolerance for it. I think this actually bodes well for the president because he is a law and order president. And there's a time and place for peaceful protest, but there are those who would want to wreak havoc and sow chaos. And there are also local municipalities that are allowing this to happen. So we're all for states' rights and local control. I think what's going to happen, Chad, is that you're going to have businesses who've been looted and their property destroyed leave places where their local leaders are allowing this to happen. You're going to have people moving out to states like Texas. So in the long run, people are going to live with the corruption and the filth for only so long, and then they're going to decide this I can't do this anymore, not to my family, not to my colleagues and my business. So a lot of things are going to suffer, and some of that, I don't want any American to suffer. I certainly don't want anybody to not feel secure in America. But when people have to live in this manner, they will vote with their feet. And you'll have places like Atlanta and Minneapolis and New York and others, including our police officers. They're going to say, I'm not going to risk my life anymore when you're hamstringing me, put me in a defensive posture, and risking my life and my livelihood with respect to lawsuits, but my life in terms of dealing with trying to rid our communities of the bad guys, they're going to leave too. Yeah. So I think in time, there's going to be a migration away from these Democrat-led large cities that have a culture of failure and corruption.
Yeah. Congressman, as always, appreciate your time, and hope you and your family have a good Independence Day weekend.
Always good to be with you, Chad. Happy 4th of July, and God bless West Texas.
All right. Thank you very much. That's Congressman Jodey Arrington here on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk KFYO. Do appreciate him taking some time as we wrap up this half hour. One thing that I thought was very interesting coming from Congressman Arrington on this issue of bars, and again, he's not the governor. He doesn't get to make the decision to shut down bars or reduce occupancy in restaurants. But, hey, if you're going to shut down a business and if you're going to shut down, this many businesses, an entire industry, you owe them some money. They need to be compensated. And I think that works two ways. One, yeah, it does help out the bar owners. Two, it may make a governor think twice about closing down an entire industry because, I don't know if you realize this, we've got a lot of bars in Texas. Think of the money that would have to be paid out, some by the state, some maybe local, and other by the feds. It would make you think twice, wouldn't it, before shutting down an entire industry?